The heat inside the International Hotel showroom in Las Vegas on August 7th, 1973, was oppressive even before the lights came up. 14,000 people packed into a space designed for 12,000 created a wall of humidity that the air conditioning system struggled against like a boxer in the 15th round. The smell of perfume and cologne and anticipation mixed with cigarette smoke that hung in layers near the ceiling like stratified clouds. Women in their finest dresses fanned themselves with programs. Men loosened their ties and checked their watches. Everyone was waiting. Backstage, in dressing room number 3, Elvis Aaron Presley sat in front of a mirror surrounded by lights that made his reflection look like something from a dream or a nightmare, depending on his mood. Tonight, he could not decide which. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the collar of his white jumpsuit, the one with the American eagle emblazoned across the chest in gold and red stones. Each stone had been hand-placed by a woman in Los Angeles, who specialized in making men look like gods under stage lights. The suit weighed nearly 30 pounds. Sometimes Elvis felt like he was wearing armor. Sometimes he felt like he was wearing a coffin. 5 minutes, EP, called Red West from the doorway. Red had been with Elvis since high school in Memphis, back when Elvis was just a weird kid who dressed different and sang different and made the girls scream in a way that frightened their parents. Now Red was head of security, which meant he spent most of his time keeping Elvis alive and keeping the world at arm's length. Crowds getting restless. Elvis nodded but did not speak. His throat felt tight. Not from illness or exhaustion, though both were constant companions these days. No, this was something else, something he could not name, but could feel settling over him like a shroud. He had felt it all day, a sense of impending something, doom or revelation or both. "You okay, boss?" Red asked, stepping closer. He had seen Elvis in every possible state over the years, triumphant and broken, flying high on success and crawling low through depression. But tonight, there was something in Elvis's eyes that Red had not seen before, a kind of haunted expectation. "I am fine," Elvis said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Just tired." "You have been tired for 5 years," Red said quietly. It was the kind of truth that only an old friend could speak. "Maybe you should cancel. Tell them you are sick." Elvis shook his head. 14,000 people, Red. They paid good money. They drove from Arizona and California and Texas. Some of them saved for months. I cannot disappoint them. But what he did not say was that disappointing people was the one thing Elvis Presley absolutely could not do. Not his fans, not his father, not Colonel Parker, not the millions of people who had expectations about who he was supposed to be and how he was supposed to act. The weight of all those expectations was heavier than any jumpsuit. 2 minutes, called Charlie Hodge from down the hallway. Charlie was Elvis's rhythm guitarist and right-hand man on stage, the one who handed him scarves and water and kept the show moving when Elvis's mind wandered to dark places. Tonight, Charlie sounded nervous, which was unusual. Charlie never got nervous. Elvis stood, stretched, felt his back pop in 3 places. He was 38 years old and felt 60. The pills he took to wake up and the pills he took to sleep and the pills he took to perform and the pills he took to feel normal had created a chemical symphony in his bloodstream that was slowly but surely killing him. He knew this. Everyone around him knew this. But no one talked about it because talking about it would mean doing something about it, and doing something about it would mean changing everything, and changing everything was terrifying. He walked toward the stage entrance, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway like a countdown. Click, click, click. Each step bringing him closer to the moment when he would have to become Elvis Presley again instead of just Elvis, the man who was tired and lonely and scared of things he could not name. The orchestra was already in place. Joe Guercio stood on his podium, baton ready, 43 musicians behind him, waiting for the downbeat that would signal the beginning of the show. The opening number was always C.C. Rider, a blues song that got the crowd on their feet and reminded everyone that Elvis, for all his jumpsuits and Las Vegas glitter, was still a man who could sing the blues with more soul than seemed humanly possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the voice of the announcer over the sound system, and the crowd erupted into screams before he even finished the sentence. "The International Hotel is proud to present the one, the only, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley." The lights exploded, the orchestra hit the opening chord, and Elvis walked out onto that stage like a man walking into battle, which in many ways he was. The battle was against time and expectations and his own demons and the creeping sense that all of this meant nothing, that he had given his life to entertaining people and had somehow lost his soul in the process. But then the spotlight hit him, and 14,000 people screamed, and muscle memory took over. His hips moved, his voice opened up. His hands gestured in ways that had been studied and copied and parodied so many times that they had become part of the cultural language of America. And for a moment, for one brief shining moment, he was who they needed him to be. He sang C.C. Rider with power that surprised even him. The voice was still there, buried under the pills and the exhaustion and the disappointment. The voice was the one thing that had never betrayed him. His body might be falling apart. His marriage might be over. His career might be stuck in a Las Vegas loop that felt more like a prison than a palace. But the voice remained. The crowd screamed. They always screamed. Sometimes Elvis wondered if they would scream even if he just stood there and did nothing. Maybe they were screaming at the idea of Elvis Presley more than at the actual man on stage. Maybe he had become so mythologized that the real person did not matter anymore. He moved into I Got a Woman, and the band locked in behind him like they had played together for 1,000 years, which, in some ways, they had. James Burton on lead guitar, John Wilkinson on rhythm, Jerry Sheff on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums. These were some of the best musicians in the world, and they were playing behind a man who had started out as a truck driver in Memphis with a strange voice and a stranger dream. But as he sang, as he moved across the stage, as he hit notes that made women grab their hearts and men nod in appreciation, something was wrong. Elvis could feel it. That sense of impending something had not gone away. It had intensified. It was like static electricity in the air before a lightning strike, like the smell of ozone, like the way dogs howl before an earthquake. His eyes scanned the crowd as he sang. Front row, second row, third row. Faces blurred together in a sea of open mouths and reaching hands. Everyone wanted a piece of him, a scarf, a touch, a moment of eye contact that they could take home and treasure and tell their grandchildren about. I saw Elvis Presley, and he looked right at me. And then he saw him, third row, seat 14. A man in a Marine Corps dress uniform, sitting perfectly still while everyone around him screamed and waved. The uniform was pressed to perfection, the brass buttons gleaming even in the dim house lights. But it was not the uniform that made Elvis's voice catch. It was not even the fact that the man's left sleeve was pinned back where his arm should have been. It was the eyes. Elvis knew those eyes. He had looked into those eyes in another place, another time, another life. In a hangar in Da Nang, Vietnam, December 22nd, 1968, when the world was on fire and young men were dying for reasons that nobody could quite explain, and Elvis Presley had flown halfway around the world because Bob Hope had gotten sick, and someone needed to remind those boys that people back home still cared about them. The song ended. The crowd applauded. But Elvis did not move into the next number. He stood there, frozen, staring at the man in the third row. Joe Guercio looked up from his podium confused. Charlie Hodge stepped forward with a scarf, ready to hand it to Elvis for distribution to the crowd, but Elvis did not take it. The band members exchanged glances. Something was happening. Something unscripted. In the control booth at the back of the showroom, the director spoke into his headset. "What is he doing? Why did he stop?" The cameras, 3 of them positioned around the room to record every show for potential release, kept rolling. Unfocused on Elvis's face, the confusion, the recognition, the emotions playing across his features like clouds racing across the sky. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, and his voice cracked in a way that made the entire room go silent. 14,000 people who had been screaming and clapping moments before suddenly stopped. The silence was so complete you could hear the air conditioning units humming. "Ladies and gentlemen, would you please bear with me for just a moment?" He did not sound like Elvis Presley entertainer. He sounded like Elvis Presley human being, vulnerable, confused, overwhelmed. Charlie Hodge, standing stage right, felt his stomach drop. He had been with Elvis through the death of Gladys, Elvis's mother. He had been there through the divorce from Priscilla. He had seen Elvis at his highest highs and his lowest lows. But he had never, in all those years, heard that particular tone in Elvis's voice. It was the sound of a man who had just seen a ghost and was not sure if the ghost was friendly or hostile, salvation or damnation. Elvis walked slowly to the edge of the stage, his hand shaking as he pointed directly at the man in the Marine uniform. The spotlight operator, a veteran of 3 years of Elvis shows who prided himself on anticipating the star's every move, followed the gesture with a spotlight. The beam of light traveled across the crowd like a searchlight and landed on Staff Sergeant Michael Patrick Donovan. Michael sat frozen in his seat, his wife Patricia beside him, gripping his remaining hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Around them, people craned their necks to see who Elvis was pointing at. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Sir," Elvis said, and his voice carried across the enormous room with such naked emotion that people in the back rows leaned forward, straining to hear. "Sir, would you please stand up?" Michael did not move. He could not move. Every muscle in his body had locked up. His breathing had become shallow. His heart hammered in his chest like it was trying to escape. Patricia touched his arm gently with her free hand. "Michael," she whispered, "he's talking to you." "Nee." But Michael could not process this, could not understand what was happening. He had come to Las Vegas because Patricia had begged him to. They had saved for 8 months to afford the trip. She had thought that seeing Elvis perform might help, might pull Michael out of the darkness that had consumed him since he came home from Vietnam 4 years earlier, might remind him that there was still beauty in the world, still joy, still reasons to keep living. Michael had not wanted to come. He had not wanted to do much of anything since the ambush, since losing his arm, since watching 3 of his men die while he survived. Survivor's guilt, the doctors called it, a clinical term for the way his soul felt like it was rotting from the inside out, a professional label for the nightmares that woke him up screaming, a medical diagnosis for the shame that he had lived while better men had died. But Patricia had insisted, had used the voice that meant she would not take no for an answer, and Michael loved her too much to keep refusing. So they had driven from San Diego to Las Vegas in their 1968 Chevrolet Impala that burned oil and needed new brakes. They had checked into a motel that cost $18 a night. They had eaten cheap dinners and cheaper breakfasts. And they had come to this show because Patricia believed, with the fierce faith of a woman who loved a broken man, that Elvis Presley might somehow help. And now Elvis Presley was pointing at him, speaking to him, asking him to stand. "Please," Elvis said, and the word hung in the air like a prayer. "Please, stand up, Marine." The word Marine hit Michael like a physical blow. It was the first time anyone in Las Vegas had called him that. Most people avoided looking at his missing arm. Most people did not know how to act around veterans. Most people wanted to pretend that Vietnam was not happening, that American boys were not dying in jungles on the other side of the world for a war that nobody could adequately explain. But Elvis had called him Marine, had used the word with respect, with recognition, with something that sounded almost like reverence. Slowly, mechanically, Michael stood. His legs felt like rubber. The spotlight was hot on his face, so bright he had to squint. Around him, 14,000 pairs of eyes turned to look. At the uniform, at the medals on his chest that told a story he did not want to tell, at the empty sleeve that announced his sacrifice to anyone who looked. Elvis pressed his hand to his mouth for a moment. From where Michael stood, he could see that Elvis's hand was shaking, could see tears in the older man's eyes, even from 3 rows back. "Folks," Elvis said, and he had to stop and clear his throat. "Folks, I need to tell you about this man. I need to tell you a story. I need to tell you about Da Nang, Vietnam, December 22nd, 1968. The crowd was so quiet you could hear hearts beating. I was there," Elvis continued, his voice thick with emotion that he was not trying to hide. "I was there entertaining troops. It was supposed to be Bob Hope's Christmas tour, but Bob got sick, and somehow, through some miracle or cosmic joke, they asked me to go instead." He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "My manager, Colonel Parker, he did not want me to go. He said it was too dangerous. He said it would hurt my career. He said that Elvis Presley did not belong in a war zone. He said a lot of things." Elvis paused, looked directly at Michael. "But I went anyway, because those boys over there, they deserved something. They deserved to know that people back home remembered them, that we cared, that they had not been forgotten." Patricia Donovan felt her husband's body begin to tremble beside her. She wanted to sit him down, to hold him, to protect him from whatever was about to happen. But she also knew that this was something Michael needed, something he had been waiting for, even though he did not know it. "Let me tell you what it was like," Elvis said, and now he was speaking to the entire room, but looking only at Michael. "Let me paint you a picture of what I saw when I flew into Da Nang on a C-130 cargo plane that rattled and shook like it was going to fall apart." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were focused somewhere beyond the room, somewhere 5 years in the past and 10,000 miles away. "It was hot," he said, "not just hot like Las Vegas hot, not just summer hot, but hot like the air itself was trying to kill you, humid like breathing through a wet blanket. And the smell, Lord God, the smell, jet fuel and jungle and sweat and something else, something I could not name at the time, but now I know was fear and courage mixed together. That is what war smells like, folks. It smells like boys trying to be brave when everything inside them is screaming to run." Someone in the audience let out a quiet sob. Elvis heard it, but did not stop. "They had set up a stage in a hangar," he continued. "Nothing fancy. Some plywood boards hammered together. Microphones that kept cutting out because the generator could not handle the load. Speakers that crackled and popped. But you know what? Those 300 Marines packed into that hangar did not care about the technical difficulties. They just wanted to hear something that reminded them of home." Elvis walked across the stage slowly, his boots clicking on the wood. "I looked out at those faces, and I saw children. 18-year-old kids who should have been worrying about prom dates and college applications. 19-year-old boys who should have been figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives. Instead, they were carrying M16 rifles and wondering if they would live to see 20. The orchestra behind him sat motionless, instruments forgotten. "But their eyes," Elvis said, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper that somehow carried through the enormous room. Their eyes looked ancient, like they had seen things that no human being should ever see, like they had been aged by fire and violence into something other than what they had been. Michael's eyes were closed now. Tears streamed down his face. He was back there, back in that hangar, back before the ambush that took his arm and his men and any illusions he had about the glory of war. "I sang for them," Elvis said, "for about an hour. Did all the hits. Hound Dog, Jailhouse Rock, Don't Be Cruel, Love Me Tender. A duck can't help falling in love. I gave them everything I had, every note, every move, every bit of energy I could muster." He paused, shook his head. "But I could feel this wall between us, this distance, Because what the hell did I know about what they were going through? I was Elvis Presley. I had flown in on a plane. I would fly out on a plane. I would go back to Graceland and my cars and my movies and my life. And they were staying in that hell. They were going back out on patrol. They were going back to the jungle where men died for unclear reasons and came home in body bags. A woman in the front row pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. After the show, Elvis continued, they were loading equipment, getting ready to move everything to the next base. There was a convoy scheduled to leave at 0500 hours. Everything in Vietnam ran on military time and military precision because chaos was the default state and order had to be imposed through rigid schedules. He stopped walking, turned back to face Michael directly. And this young Marine approached me. He was my escort officer for the day, Staff Sergeant Michael Patrick Donovan, 19 years old, had been in country for 8 months, had already earned a Silver Star for gallantry in action, had already earned 2 Purple Hearts, which meant he had been wounded twice and had gone back to his unit both times instead of taking a medical discharge home. Elvis's voice filled with something between pride and heartbreak. Twice this kid had been given a ticket home. Twice he had said no. He had gone back to his men because that is what Marines do. They do not leave their brothers. Michael opened his eyes. The spotlight was still on him. 14,000 people were looking at him. But all he could see was Elvis. All he could hear was Elvis's voice telling a story that Michael had tried so hard to forget. And this young man, Elvis said, this Marine who had already seen and done more than most people do in a lifetime, he looked at me with these incredibly old eyes and he said, "Mr. Presley, can I ask you something?" Elvis mimicked the voice, made it young and tentative and polite. "Mr. Presley, can I ask you something?" And I said, "Of course, son, anything." I was feeling good, feeling like I'd done something meaningful, feeling like I had made a difference. And you know what he asked me? The entire international hotel held its breath. 14,000 people waiting for the answer. Elvis's voice cracked completely. He asked me if I was scared. That is what he wanted to know. This kid who had been shot twice, this Marine who had seen his friends blown apart by mortars and mines and machine guns, this boy who was going back out on patrol in 6 hours to face death again. He wanted to know if I, Elvis Presley, was scared of being in Vietnam. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. "And I lied to him," Elvis said, and now tears were rolling down his face, cutting tracks through his stage makeup, making him look human and vulnerable, and nothing like the king of rock and roll. I lied to him. I said, "No, Marine. I am honored to be here. I am not scared at all. I'm proud to be here with you brave men." Elvis's hands clenched into fists. I said all the right things, all the patriotic things, all the things that I thought a hero was supposed to say, because that is what I thought he needed to hear. That is what I thought courage looked like. Fearlessness, confidence, certainty. He walked closer to the edge of the stage, as close to Michael as he could get without actually jumping into the audience. But this young man, this Marine, he looked at me with those ancient eyes and he smiled, just a little, just the corners of his mouth turning up slightly, and he said something that I have thought about every single day for the last 5 years. Elvis's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He said, "It is okay to be scared, sir. We are all scared. Every single one of us. We are terrified, but we are here anyway. That is what courage is. That is what bravery actually looks like. It's not the absence of fear. It is being scared out of your mind and showing up anyway. It is doing what needs to be done, even when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to run." The silence in the room was absolute, sacred, the kind of silence that occurs when something profound is being witnessed. And then, Elvis continued, then he said something else. Something that I have carried with me like a stone in my chest ever since. He had to stop, had to compose himself. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. He said, "Some of us are not going to make it home, Mr. Presley. Some of us are going to die here. That is just mathematics. That is just probability. And I want you to know something. I want you to know that if I do not make it, I'm glad I got to see you perform tonight. I'm glad I got to shake your hand. I'm glad I got to talk to you, because it reminded me that there is still beauty in the world. There is still music. There is still love and joy and all the things worth fighting for. There is still something beyond this jungle and this war and this death. Patricia Donovan was openly weeping now. Around her, 14,000 people were reaching for tissues, wiping their eyes, holding on to the people next to them. Men who never cried were crying. Women who had come to see a show were witnessing something else entirely, something deeper, something true. I shook his hand, Elvis said, and he demonstrated the motion his right hand extended. I gripped it firmly. I looked him in the eye the way my father taught me to, and I made him a promise. I said, "You are going to make it home, Marine. You hear me? You are going to survive this, and when you do, when you get back to the States, you come find me. You come to one of my shows, and I will remember you. I will see you in the crowd, and I will remember this conversation, and I will acknowledge you." Elvis paused, his hand still extended as if he was still shaking Michael's hand across 5 years and 10,000 miles. And he smiled at me, a real smile this time, and he said, "Yes, sir, I will do that. I will come find you." And then he saluted me, which I did not deserve, and he went back to his duties. Elvis lowered his hand. And then I broke that promise. Confusion rippled through the crowd. "Because I left," Elvis explained, and the shame in his voice was palpable. "I left Vietnam the next morning on a plane that flew me to the Philippines, then to Hawaii, then to Los Angeles, then to Memphis. I went back to my life, my comfortable, air-conditioned, safe life. I made movies, I made records, I did shows, I got divorced. I worried about chart positions and album sales and all the petty concerns of a celebrity." He spread his arms wide, indicating the showroom, the jumpsuit, the whole apparatus of Elvis Presley. "I worried about this, about Las Vegas and costumes and whether the critics liked me, about whether I was still relevant, about whether I was past my prime, about whether younger performers were going to replace me." His arms dropped. "And I forgot. I forgot my promise to that young Marine. I forgot because it was easier to forget, because remembering hurt too much. Because every time I thought about Vietnam, I thought about all those young faces. I thought about all those kids who looked like children but had eyes like old men. I thought about all the ones who did not make it home, all the ones who died in that jungle for reasons that even now I do not fully understand." Elvis's voice grew quieter, and I could not carry that weight. So I put it down. I forgot. I told myself that it was just a moment. Just a conversation. Just one Marine out of 300 I met that day. Just one promise out of thousands I had made over the years. Just one more thing I could not do, because I was only human, and I could not save everyone. Michael's throat was so tight he could barely breathe. He had never told anyone about that conversation with Elvis. Not Patricia, not his parents, not the therapists at Walter Reed. It had been his private memory, his secret talisman, something he held on to during the darkest moments. 3 months after I left Da Nang," Elvis said, and his voice dropped even lower. "On January 15th, 1969, Sergeant Donovan's unit was on a routine patrol near the DMZ, the demilitarized zone they called it, which was a joke because there was nothing demilitarized about it. It was one of the most dangerous places in Vietnam." He stopped, looked at Michael with such intensity that the younger man felt it like a physical touch. His squad was moving through thick jungle. Single file, standard formation. They had a point man, a slack man, the squad leader in the middle, rifleman, a machine gunner, and a rear guard. They had done this patrol route a dozen times. They thought they knew it. Elvis's hands trembled. But the enemy knew it too. They had been watching, waiting. They had planted command-detonated mines along the trail. They had set up machine gun positions in a horseshoe formation. They had planned an ambush with the kind of patience that Western minds struggled to comprehend. Someone in the audience whimpered. Elvis did not stop. At 14:37 hours, the point man triggered the first mine, not by stepping on it, but by breaking a tripwire that was invisible in the jungle undergrowth. The mine exploded. The point man, Lance Corporal David Chen, 19 years old, from San Francisco, died instantly. Before the echo of that explosion faded, the machine guns opened up. Elvis's voice was steady now, almost clinical, like he was reading from a military report, which, in a way, he was. He had obtained Michael's service records, had read the after-action reports, had studied what happened so he would know, so he would understand what his broken promise had cost. Sergeant Donovan's squad was caught in the kill zone. They were taking fire from 3 sides. The squad leader, Staff Sergeant Donovan, made the decision to assault through the ambush rather than retreat. It was the tactically correct decision, the only decision that might save his men. So he charged. Elvis demonstrated the motion, one fist pumping forward. He charged directly at the enemy machine gun position, firing his M16, screaming for his men to follow. He killed 3 enemy soldiers. He threw 2 grenades. He created enough confusion and chaos that 3 of his men were able to break contact and retreat to a defensive position. He paused, but then a mortar round hit, 82 millimeter, Chinese-made. It hit a tree next to Sergeant Donovan and exploded. The shrapnel tore through him, severed his left arm below the elbow, punctured his left lung, broke 3 ribs, ripped open his side. Patricia made a sound that was half sob, half wail. Michael stood perfectly still, his face like carved stone. He should have died, Elvis said simply. The corpsman, HM3 Marcus Washington, said later that he did not know how Sergeant Donovan stayed conscious, said the pain should have put him into shock, said he should have bled out in 3 minutes, but he did not. He stayed conscious, he kept fighting. He killed 2 more enemy soldiers with his pistol, shooting right-handed, even though he was left-handed, even though his left arm was gone, even though blood was pouring out of him. Elvis's voice grew fierce. He stayed conscious because 3 of his men were still pinned down. Lance Corporal James Murphy, PFC Robert Williams, Private First Class Thomas Anderson. They were caught in the open, taking fire, unable to move, and their sergeant refused to die while his men were still in danger. 14,000 people were transfixed. This was not entertainment. This was testimony. This was witness. The firefight lasted for 6 hours, Elvis continued. 6 hours of hell. Finally, a helicopter gunship arrived, provided covering fire. A medevac helicopter came in under fire. They loaded Sergeant Donovan first because he was the most critical. He refused to go, insisted his wounded men be loaded first. The crew chief had to physically overpower him and strap him to a stretcher. Elvis wiped his face. As they were lifting off, taking fire from the tree line, Sergeant Donovan watched 3 of his men die. Murphy took a bullet to the head. Williams was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. Anderson bled out from a leg wound before they could get a tourniquet on him. 3 boys who had been at my show, 3 Marines who had sung along to Love Me Tender and Hound Dog, 3 young men who had shaken my hand and thanked me for coming. He looked directly at Michael. And I knew none of this. I was back in America, oblivious, doing my life, worrying about my career and my marriage and all the things that seemed so important but meant nothing. I did not check. I did not follow up. I did not keep my promise. Michael's voice came out as a hoarse whisper that somehow carried through the room. You did not know, sir. But I should have, Elvis said fiercely. I should have found out. I should have asked. I should have checked on every single Marine I met that day. I should have done something more than just show up for 1 hour and then leave. He turned back to the crowd. Sergeant Donovan spent 14 months recovering at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., 22 surgeries. They saved his life, but not his arm. They reconstructed his chest. They repaired his lung. They put him back together like a puzzle, but some pieces were missing and would never be found. Elvis's voice grew soft. He learned to write with his right hand, learned to eat with one hand, learned to tie his shoes with one hand, learned to do everything that most of us do without thinking. But now every simple task required adaptation and patience and the kind of courage that most people never have to find. He paused, and he learned to live with the nightmares, the ones where he hears his men screaming, where he sees their faces, where he relives that ambush over and over, trying to change the outcome, trying to save them, and always failing because the past cannot be changed no matter how many times you revisit it in your dreams. Patricia squeezed Michael's hand so hard it hurt. He squeezed back, needing the pain, needing the anchor to reality. He learned to live with the survivor's guilt, Elvis continued, the question that haunts every veteran who comes home when their friends do not. Why did I live? Why did they die? What makes me special? What makes me deserving of survival when they were not? Elvis's voice cracked, and there is no answer to that question. No good answer. Just mathematics and probability and random chance dressed up in philosophical language to make it seem like there is meaning when there is not. He wiped his eyes again. Sergeant Donovan was medically discharged from the Marine Corps in March of 1970. He received an honorable discharge, a medical pension. His Silver Star was upgraded to a Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. He was nominated for the Medal of Honor, but the paperwork was lost in the bureaucracy. He received his Purple Hearts, his campaign ribbons, all the metal and fabric and paper that is supposed to represent sacrifice, but somehow never captures it adequately. Elvis spread his arms. And I knew none of this. I was in Hollywood making movies that I hated, singing songs that I did not believe in, going through the motions of being Elvis Presley while the actual person inside the costume was drowning. He dropped his arms. And tonight, I am standing here on this stage, and I look out at this crowd the way I have looked out at 1,000 crowds, and I see you, Sergeant Donovan, and I recognize you, not because of the uniform, though the uniform is beautifully pressed, not because of the medals, though the medals are impressive, not because of your missing arm, though that tells its own story. No, I recognize you because of your eyes. Elvis pointed at his own eyes. Because I never forgot your eyes, Marine? I lied before. I did not really forget, not completely. I just pushed the memory down, buried it, refused to look at it because looking at it hurt too much. Because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging my own cowardice, my own failure, my own broken promise. Michael shook his head violently. No, sir, you are not a coward. But I broke my promise, Elvis said. I told you I would remember. I told you I would acknowledge you, and I forgot. Or I pretended to forget, which is worse. His voice filled with fierce emotion. But you kept your promise, Marine. You survived. Against all odds, against probability, against death itself, you survived. You made it home. And you came to my show. Just like I asked you to. Just like you said you would. You kept your promise even though I broke mine. Elvis dropped to one knee at the edge of the stage. The crowd gasped. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the biggest star in the world, on his knee, on the dirty stage floor in his 30-pound jumpsuit, on his knee like a supplicant. And I want to say something to you, Staff Sergeant Michael Patrick Donovan, United States Marine Corps. I want to say it here right now, in front of all these people, so there are witnesses, so I cannot take it back, so it becomes real and permanent and irrevocable. He pressed his hand to his heart. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for charging into that ambush to save your men. Thank you for fighting when you should have been dying. Thank you for surviving when survival seemed impossible. Thank you for keeping your promise to me even though I broke mine to you. Thank you for teaching me what courage really means. Thank you for being braver than I ever was or ever will be. Thank you for reminding me tonight what really matters in this world. Thank you for giving me a chance to do this right, to acknowledge you, to see you, to say these words out loud. 14,000 people were on their feet now, not cheering, not applauding, just standing in respect, in recognition, in shared witness to something profound. Many were weeping openly, men and women both, veterans and civilians, young and old, all of them united in this moment of raw human connection. Elvis stayed on his knee. And I want to say something else to every veteran in this room tonight, to every man and woman who has worn the uniform of this country, to every person who has sacrificed for us, to every family member who has sent someone they loved into harm's way and waited with terror and hope for them to come home, to everyone who has served or loved someone who served. He looked around the enormous room, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. I see you, I acknowledge you, I honor you, and I am sorry that it took me so long to say this out loud. I am sorry that we as a country do not do this enough. I'm sorry that we send you to fight and then do not give you the welcome home you deserve. I am sorry for all the ways we fail you, but I want you to know, right here, right now, that your sacrifice matters, your service matters, you matter. The applause, when it came, was different from any applause Elvis had ever received. It was not the screaming of fans. It was not the hysteria of Beatlemania. It was the deep, sincere, overwhelming appreciation of people who had witnessed something true, something that mattered, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Elvis stood slowly, his knees protesting. He turned to Joe Guercio. "Joe, we are changing the set list. We are going to do an American trilogy next, and we are going to dedicate it to Staff Sergeant Michael Patrick Donovan and every single person who has worn the uniform of this country. And then we are going to dedicate the rest of this show to all the warriors who came home and all the warriors who did not." Joe nodded, his own eyes red. He turned to the orchestra, raised his baton. The haunting opening notes of An American Trilogy filled the showroom. The song was a medley of 3 Civil War-era songs arranged by Mickey Newbury. Dixie, representing the South, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, representing the North. All My Trials, representing the pain and hope of both. Elvis had been performing this song for 2 years. It had become a highlight of his show, a moment of patriotic fervor that always received standing ovations. But tonight was different. Tonight, every note carried weight, every word carried meaning, every phrase was a prayer and a promise and an acknowledgement. "Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton," Elvis sang, and his voice was pure and powerful and heartbreaking all at once. "Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland." Michael stood at attention, his right hand raised in salute, tears streaming down his face. Around him, other veterans in the crowd stood too. A man in a wheelchair with no legs. A woman wearing her husband's dog tags because he had not come home. An older man with Korean War ribbons on a jacket that was too small now. A younger man who looked hollow-eyed and haunted in a way that Michael recognized because he saw it in the mirror every morning. An entire section of the International Hotel was suddenly transformed into a memorial service, a reunion, a reckoning, a moment of recognition for those who had given, and those who had lost, and those who had survived with pieces of themselves missing. "Glory, glory, hallelujah," Elvis sang, and the orchestra swelled behind him with military precision and emotional power. "Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on." The song built toward its climax. Elvis's voice soared, hitting notes that seemed impossible, sustaining them in ways that made people forget to breathe. This was why he was the king, not because of the movies or the costumes or the myth, but because of this, because his voice could contain multitudes, could carry emotion that transcended language, could communicate truths that words alone could never express. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry," he sang softly, bringing the song back down to intimacy after the crescendo. "You know your daddy's bound to die, but all my trials, Lord, soon be over." When he finished, he did not move. He stood with his head bowed, his arms at his sides, as vulnerable as he had ever been on stage. The applause, when it came, lasted for 5 full minutes. People standing, people crying, people reaching for each other because they needed to touch something real, something human, something connected. After the show, after the final encore, after the last note had faded and the crowd had filed out into the Las Vegas night, still wiping their eyes, Elvis did something he had never done before. He asked Red West to bring Michael Donovan backstage. "Are you sure, boss?" Red asked. "You are exhausted. You need to rest." "I need to do this more than I need to rest," Elvis said. "Find him. Bring him back here, please." Red nodded and disappeared into the rapidly emptying showroom. Elvis waited in his dressing room, still in his sweat-soaked jumpsuit, still with stage makeup running down his face, too emotionally raw to think about changing or cleaning up. Charlie Hodge brought him a towel and a glass of water. "That was something else tonight, EP. That was really something." Elvis nodded, but did not speak. He was afraid that if he started talking, he would not be able to stop, that everything he had pushed down for 5 years would come pouring out in a flood that would drown him. 10 minutes later, Red returned with Michael and Patricia. The young couple looked overwhelmed, intimidated by the backstage chaos, by the crew members breaking down equipment, by the bodyguards watching them with professional suspicion, by the sheer reality of being in Elvis Presley's dressing room. Elvis stood when they entered. For a moment the two men just looked at each other, the king of rock and roll and the Marine, the celebrity and the veteran, the man who had broken a promise and the man who had kept one. Then Elvis crossed the space between them and pulled Michael into a fierce embrace. Michael, caught off guard, did not know what to do with his one arm. Finally, he wrapped it around Elvis's back, and the two men held each other like drowning victims holding onto wreckage, like survivors of something terrible who had found each other again, like brothers who had been separated and were now reunited. When they pulled apart, both men were crying. "I am so sorry," Elvis said. "I should have found you. I should have checked on you. I should have done something more than I did." Michael shook his head fiercely. "Sir, with all due respect, you did more than you know, more than you could possibly know." He took a shaky breath. "That day in Da Nang, when you told me it was okay to be scared, when you said courage was showing up anyway despite the fear, when you looked me in the eye and made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just another grunt in an endless war, that conversation saved my life." Elvis started to protest, but Michael cut him off. "No, sir, please let me finish. I need to say this." He gathered his thoughts. "When I was in Walter Reed, when I was going through all those surgeries, when I was learning to live with one arm, when I was dealing with the nightmares and the guilt and the crushing weight of survival, I repeated your words to myself every single day, sometimes every single hour." Michael's voice grew stronger. "I would wake up screaming, and I would remember what you said. That courage is being scared and showing up anyway. I would want to give up, to just stop trying, to let myself sink into the darkness. And I would remember that conversation. I would remember that Elvis Presley looked me in the eye and told me I mattered, that I was going to survive, that I had a promise to keep. He laughed, but it was wet with tears. And I kept it, sir. I kept that promise because it was the only thing I had to hold on to. It was my lifeline, my tether to the world, my reason to keep fighting when fighting seemed pointless." Elvis reached out and took Michael's remaining hand in both of his. "What are you doing now? How are you making it?" "I am a high school teacher," Michael said, and there was pride in his voice. "History. I teach at Claremont High School in San Diego. I teach kids about wars, so maybe, hopefully, someday we will stop having them. Or at least stop sending children to fight them." He glanced at Patricia, who had been standing quietly beside him. "And this is my wife, Patricia. We got married in 1971. She is a nurse at Balboa Naval Medical Center. She works with wounded veterans. She understands what I go through in ways that most people could not." Patricia stepped forward, and Elvis took her hand as well. "Thank you for taking care of him," Elvis said simply. "Thank you for loving him, when loving him must have been difficult." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "It has never been difficult to love him, Mr. Presley. It has only been difficult to watch him hurt and not be able to fix it. But nights like tonight, moments like this, these help. These remind him that his service meant something, that his sacrifice was not in vain." "We have a daughter," Michael added, "Emma. She is 2 years old. She is the reason I get up every morning, the reason I keep trying, the reason I chose life over the alternative." Elvis felt like he had been punched in the chest. This man, this Marine who had given so much, had considered death as an option, had stood on that edge and looked over, and had chosen life, had chosen to keep going. "Will you do me a favor?" Elvis asked. "Will you bring your family backstage tomorrow night? I want to meet Emma. I want to know the people who keep you showing up every day." Michael smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time. "Yes, sir. We would be honored." "No," Elvis said firmly. "The honor is mine. The honor has always been mine." They talked for another 30 minutes, about San Diego and teaching and parenthood, about Elvis's own struggles and fears and doubts, about Vietnam and the ambush and the men who died, about recovery and PTSD and the long road back to something resembling normal. It was the most honest conversation Elvis had had in years, maybe ever. No pretense, no performance. Just two men talking about life and death and everything in between. When Michael and Patricia finally left, escorted out by Red West through a back entrance to avoid the remaining fans, Elvis sat down heavily in his chair. He was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with singing or performing. He had been emotionally eviscerated, stripped bare, reduced to his essential self. But he also felt lighter, like he had been carrying a weight he did not know was there, and someone had finally removed it. Like a wound that had been festering had finally been lanced and could now begin to heal. He sat there in the empty dressing room, surrounded by the detritus of performance, scarves soaked with sweat, water bottles half empty, towels stained with stage makeup, the costume he would wear again tomorrow night hanging on a rack in the corner, waiting, always waiting. Elvis thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. About the boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who had grown up poor and hungry and different. About the teenager who had walked into Sun Records with $4 and the dream of recording a song for his mother's birthday. About the young man who had become famous almost overnight, thrust into a spotlight so bright it burned. He thought about all the choices he had made and the choices that had been made for him. About signing with Colonel Parker, who had guided his career, but also controlled it in ways that sometimes felt suffocating. About going into the army when he was at the peak of his fame, interrupting his career for 2 years of service in Germany. About making all those movies, 31 of them, most of which he hated but did anyway because the colonel said it was good business. He thought about Priscilla, about meeting her when she was 14 and he was 24. Stationed in Germany, about bringing her to Graceland when she was 17, about marrying her in 1967, about their daughter, Lisa Marie, born 9 months later, about the divorce that was finalized just this year in 1973, about how fame and pills and infidelity and the weight of being Elvis Presley had destroyed something that might have been beautiful if he had been someone else, if he had been anyone else. He thought about his mother, Gladys, who had died in 1958 when Elvis was 23. The grief had nearly killed him. She had been his anchor, his safe harbor, the one person who loved him not for being Elvis Presley, but for being her son. When she died, something in him died too, some essential goodness or innocence or hope. He had never really recovered, and he thought about Vietnam. About that day in Da Nang, when he had looked into the eyes of young men and seen his own mortality reflected back, when he had realized that fame and wealth and success meant nothing in the face of actual courage, when he had met Michael Donovan, and made a promise that he had tried so hard to forget because remembering hurt too much. But tonight he had remembered, had been forced to remember, had chosen to remember. And in that remembering, in that acknowledgement, in that public declaration of gratitude and respect and honor, something had shifted. Some part of him that had been frozen had thawed. Some door that had been locked had opened. He had felt for a few moments on that stage like he was doing something that actually mattered, not entertaining, not performing, not being Elvis, but actually making a difference in someone's life, actually using his fame for something meaningful, actually keeping a promise that should never have been broken. Charlie Hodge appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Elvis and sat down in the chair opposite him. They had been friends since 1955, when they met during Elvis's brief time in the army. Charlie had been there through everything, the rise and the plateau and the slow decline, the marriages and divorces, the good times and the dark times, all of it. "That was something else tonight, EP," Charlie said quietly. "That was really something." Elvis cupped the coffee mug in his hands, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers. "I should have done it years ago. I should have found him as soon as I got back from Vietnam. I should have checked on every single one of those Marines." "You cannot save everyone, boss," Charlie said gently. "You cannot carry the weight of the whole world on your shoulders." "But I can carry some of it," Elvis replied. "I can use this platform, this fame, this voice that God gave me. I can use it to honor people who deserve honor. I can use it to recognize people who have been overlooked. I can do better than I have been doing." He took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and strong the way he liked it. "I have been so caught up in my own problems, my divorce, my weight, my dependence on these damn pills, my career fears, whether I am still relevant, whether people still care, whether I still matter." He laughed, but it was a sad sound. "And meanwhile, there are men like Michael Donovan out there, men who gave everything, men who sacrificed in ways I cannot even comprehend. And I have been too self-absorbed to notice, too wrapped up in my own drama to see beyond the end of my nose." Charlie leaned forward. "But you saw him tonight. You recognized him. You stopped the show and you honored him in front of 14,000 people. That matters, EP. That really matters." "It does not undo 5 years of forgetting," Elvis said. "It does not give him back his arm or his friends or the innocence he lost in that jungle. It does not make up for anything." "No," Charlie agreed, "but it is a start. It is something. And sometimes something is enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, drinking their coffee, existing in the shared space of old friendship. Then Elvis spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I have been thinking about legacy lately, about what I am going to leave behind when I am gone. And I look at my career, and I see movies I am not proud of, and songs I recorded just for the money and performances where I was phoning it in because I was too drugged up or too tired or too depressed to care. And I wonder what it all means. What was the point of all of it?" He gestured around the dressing room. "This, Las Vegas, 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, for months at a time. Is this really what I was meant to do? Is this really the best use of whatever talent I was given? Entertaining drunk tourists and high rollers who are here more for the spectacle than the music?" Charlie did not answer immediately. He had learned over the years that sometimes Elvis just needed to talk, to process, to work through things out loud. "But tonight," Elvis continued, "tonight I felt like I did something that actually mattered. I felt like I used my platform for something good, for something meaningful. And I want more of that, Charlie. I want to figure out how to make what I do matter beyond just entertainment." "You already do that," Charlie said. "Every time you perform, you give people joy. You give them a break from their problems. You give them memories that they will carry for the rest of their lives. That matters too." "Maybe," Elvis said, "but there has to be more. There has to be a way to use this fame, this voice, this platform, for something bigger than myself, to honor people like Michael, to recognize sacrifice, to make sure that veterans are not forgotten, to use my voice to speak for those who do not have one." He stood up, energized now despite his exhaustion. "I am going to talk to the colonel. I'm going to insist that we dedicate a portion of every show to veterans. I'm going to use my platform to make sure they are seen and honored and appreciated. I'm going to do better." Charlie smiled. "I think that is a good plan, boss. I think that is a really good plan. And I am going to stay in touch with Michael," Elvis continued. "Not just a one-time thing, but actually maintain a friendship. Actually be there for him the way he needs someone to be there. Actually keep my promise this time." He paused, looked at Charlie with something like hope in his eyes. "Do you think it is too late? Do you think I can still turn this around? Still make my life mean something beyond just being Elvis Presley?" Charlie stood up, walked over to Elvis, put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I think that you just did something tonight that 14,000 people will never forget. I think you just gave a wounded veteran the recognition and honor he deserved. I think you just demonstrated what it means to admit failure and do better. So no, it is not too late. It is never too late to start doing the right thing." Elvis nodded, feeling tears prick his eyes again. "Thank you, Charlie, for being here, for being honest with me, for being my friend even when I did not deserve it." "Always, EP," Charlie said. "Always." They finished their coffee in silence, two old friends sharing a moment of quiet understanding. Then Elvis changed out of his jumpsuit, washed the makeup off his face, and prepared to go back to his hotel suite. Back to his life. Back to being Elvis Presley. But something had changed. Some fundamental shift had occurred. He felt it in his bones, in his heart, in his soul. He had been given a second chance to keep a promise, and he was determined not to waste it. He was determined to do better, to be better, to use whatever time he had left, however long or short that might be, to make a difference, to honor those who deserved honor, to speak for those who could not speak for themselves, to be worthy of the gifts he had been given. That was his new promise, made to himself, to Michael, to all the veterans who had sacrificed, to everyone who looked to him for something beyond entertainment. He would do better. He would show up. He would keep his promises, even if it was hard, even if it was scary, even if it required changing the comfortable patterns that had governed his life for so long. He would do it. Because courage, as Michael had taught him 5 years ago in a hangar in Da Nang, is being scared and showing up anyway. And Elvis Presley was going to show up. Charlie Hodge appeared in the doorway. "You okay, boss?" Elvis nodded slowly. "I am. For the first time in a long time, I actually am." The next night, Michael and Patricia brought Emma backstage. The toddler had blonde curls and her father's eyes and absolutely no concept of the gravity of the moment. She was more interested in the shiny objects around the dressing room than in the man who wore them. Elvis got down on the floor with her, completely heedless of his jumpsuit or his dignity or any of the things that usually governed his behavior. He played peekaboo. He made funny faces. He let her try on his sunglasses, which were far too big for her tiny face and kept sliding down her nose. Emma giggled with the unself-conscious joy of a child who had never known war or violence or loss. And Elvis felt something in his chest crack open, some hardened thing that had been protecting him from feeling too much. "This is what we were fighting for," Michael said softly, watching his daughter play. "This right here, this innocence, this joy, this ability to laugh without wondering if a mortar is going to land on you, this freedom to just be a child." Elvis looked up at him, the sunglasses still perched comically on Emma's face. "You protected it. You made sure she could have this. You and all the others who went to that place and did those terrible things so that children back here could be children." He stood up slowly, his knees protesting. Emma protested too, wanting him to keep playing, but Patricia picked her up and soothed her. Elvis handed Michael an envelope. "Do not open this until you get home, and do not argue with me about it." Michael looked at the envelope suspiciously. "Sir, I said do not argue with me about it," Elvis repeated, but he was smiling. "That is an order from a superior officer." "Sir, you were never in the military," Michael said, but he was smiling too. "I am Elvis Presley," Elvis said with mock seriousness. "I outrank everyone." That night's show was different from the first. Elvis was looser, freer, more present. He told stories between songs. He joked with the band. He seemed lighter somehow, like he had put down a burden he had been carrying for too long. And when he sang An American Trilogy, Michael stood again. But this time, he was not alone. The entire third row stood, veterans from every branch, every war, every era. They had come because word had spread, because Michael had told other vets at the San Diego VA hospital, because those vets had told others, because the veteran community is a network connected by shared experience and mutual understanding. Elvis dedicated the song to all of them, called out each one by name, acknowledged their service, made sure that 14,000 people knew that these men and women had given pieces of themselves for their country. For the remaining 3 nights of that engagement, the pattern continued. More veterans came each night. By the final night, the first 5 rows were filled with them, uniforms and civilian clothes, young and old, whole and wounded, all of them standing when Elvis sang, all of them saluting. All of them feeling, perhaps for the first time since they came home, that someone saw them, that someone appreciated them, that their sacrifice had been witnessed and acknowledged and honored. When Michael finally opened the envelope after returning to San Diego, he found a check for $50,000 and a letter written in Elvis's handwriting. The letter said, "Michael, I cannot give you back your arm. I cannot erase your nightmares. I cannot bring back Murphy and Williams and Anderson. I cannot undo the ambush or the pain or the years of recovery. I cannot make the world understand what you sacrificed or why it mattered. But I can do this. This money is to pay for Emma's education, all of it, from kindergarten through college and beyond, if she wants to pursue graduate school. Whatever she wants to study, wherever she wants to go. I do not care if she wants to be a doctor or a teacher or an artist or anything else. This money is to make sure that she has every opportunity, every chance, every possibility, because you gave everything to protect her future. You charged into an ambush. You fought when you should have been dying. You survived when survival seemed impossible. You came home broken and rebuilt yourself into something stronger. You chose life, you chose hope, you chose to keep going. The least I can do is help secure Emma's future. The least I can do is make sure that your sacrifice translates into opportunity for the next generation. The least I can do is try to balance the cosmic scales in some small way. You taught me what courage really means. Let me teach Emma about gratitude. Let me show her that her father's service mattered, that it was honored, that it was appreciated. You do not owe me anything, but I owe you everything. You reminded me why I do what I do. You reminded me that music and art and beauty matter because they are what we fight to protect. You reminded me that my voice is a gift and I should use it to honor those who cannot speak for themselves. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for teaching me. Your friend, Elvis. Michael tried to return the money. He wrote letters to Elvis. He called Graceland. He tried to get in touch through Colonel Parker, but Elvis was insistent. He called Michael directly. "You cannot say no to the king," Elvis said, and Michael could hear the smile in his voice. "That is in the Constitution, I'm pretty sure. Amendment 28 or something." "There are only 26 amendments, sir," Michael said. "Well, then I will have to talk to Congress about adding another one," Elvis replied. "The Elvis Amendment. It will say that when the king gives you money for your daughter's education, you have to accept it gracefully and say thank you." Michael laughed despite himself. "Thank you, sir. This means more than I can express." "You have already expressed more than I deserve," Elvis said. Now go be a great father, teach your students, love your wife, live your life, and know that somewhere in Memphis there is a man who thinks about you and prays for you and considers you a friend. Over the next 4 years, until Elvis's death in August of 1977, the two men stayed in touch, not constantly. Not in any way that made headlines or appeared in magazines or became part of the Elvis mythology, but they exchanged letters. They called each other on occasion. They maintained a connection that was private and precious and real. Elvis would call sometimes, usually late at night, when the loneliness got too heavy, when the pills were not working, when the pressure of being Elvis Presley felt like it was crushing him, and Michael would talk to him, would listen, would remind him of what he had said in Da Nang, that courage is being scared and showing up anyway, that it is okay to be afraid, that fear does not make you weak. "Sometimes I feel like I am drowning," Elvis said during one late-night call in the spring of 1977. His voice sounded slurred, which meant he had been taking too many pills again. "Like I am so deep underwater that I cannot even see the surface anymore." "Then stop swimming," Michael said. "Stop fighting. Float for a while. Let the water hold you. Trust that you will rise eventually." "What if I do not?" Elvis asked. "What if I just keep sinking?" "Then I will dive down and pull you up," Michael said simply. "That is what brothers do." There was a long silence. Then Elvis said, "Thank you for being my friend, for not wanting anything from me, for just being present." "Always, sir," Michael said. "Always." When Elvis died on August 16th, 1977, Michael flew to Memphis for the funeral. He could not afford it. The cost of the plane ticket and the hotel stretched his teacher's salary to the breaking point. But Patricia insisted. She used money from her own savings, money she had been setting aside for a new washing machine because theirs was dying. "You need to go," she said. "You need to say goodbye properly." So Michael went. He stood at the back of Graceland during the viewing, letting the family and the celebrities and the important people have their moment in front. He did not try to get close, did not try to speak to anyone. He was just there to pay his respects, to honor a promise, to say goodbye to a friend. But before he left, he approached the casket for one final moment alone. Security tried to stop him, but Linda Thompson, Elvis's former girlfriend who had known about Michael, intervened. "Let him through," she said. "Elvis would want him here." Michael stood in front of the casket. Elvis looked peaceful in death in a way he had not looked in life. The struggle was over. The pain was ended. The king was at rest. Michael came to attention. He raised his right hand in a final salute, and he whispered 6 words that no one else heard. "Thank you for remembering me, sir." Then he turned and walked out of Graceland into the Memphis heat, crying tears that were equal parts grief and gratitude. Emma Donovan grew up knowing that Elvis Presley had paid for her education. Her father told her the story when she was old enough to understand, told her about the day in Las Vegas when Elvis recognized him in a crowd of 14,000 people, told her about the promise kept and the promise broken and the promise renewed. She took the responsibility seriously. She studied hard. She made excellent grades. She got accepted to Duke University, where she majored in psychology with a focus on trauma and recovery. She graduated summa cum laude in 1995 and went on to earn a master's degree in clinical psychology. Now she is a counselor specializing in helping veterans with PTSD. She works at the Veterans Administration in San Diego, in the same system where her father once received treatment. Her office wall carries a photo that her mother took at that Las Vegas show. Elvis Presley holding a 2-year-old Emma, both of them wearing Elvis's sunglasses, both of them grinning at the camera in a moment of pure, unguarded joy. "My dad says Mr. Presley saved his life," she tells her clients during their first sessions. "Not that day in Vietnam, though what Elvis said there mattered. Not even that night in Las Vegas, though the recognition and acknowledgement helped. But in the years after, in the late-night phone calls and the letters and the friendship, in the reminder that he was seen, that he was valued, that he was more than his wounds or his nightmares or his survivor's guilt. She pauses, looks at the photo. And Elvis did not save my dad because Elvis was famous or powerful or rich. He saved him because he was present, because he showed up, because he kept a promise, even if he kept it late. Because he used his platform to honor those who had no platform. Because he demonstrated that courage comes in many forms, and one of those forms is admitting when you have failed and choosing to do better. Her clients, many of whom are struggling with the same demons her father fought, listen to this story and feel something shift inside them. Feel a small hope kindle. Feel the possibility that they too might survive, might heal, might find their way back to something resembling peace. Michael Donovan is 78 years old now. He retired from teaching in 2010 after 40 years in the classroom. He still lives in San Diego with Patricia, who is 77 and still as fierce and devoted as she was at 23. They have been married for 52 years. They have weathered storms that would have destroyed weaker unions. Michael still wakes up some nights with the dreams, the ambush, the screams, the faces of Murphy and Williams and Anderson. But he also wakes up to Patricia next to him, her hand finding his in the dark, grounding him, reminding him that he is home, that he is safe, that he survived. He wakes up to photos of Emma and her family. She married a kind man named David, who teaches English at a community college. They have 2 children, Michael's grandchildren, who call him Papa Mike and climb on him like he's a jungle gym and do not care that he only has 1 arm because to them that is just how Papa Mike is. He wakes up to a life that almost did not happen, a life he fought for and bled for and nearly died for, a life that was, in a strange way, made possible by a promise kept and a recognition given and a moment of human connection that transcended celebrity and tragedy. And he still has that moment burned into his memory, that moment when Elvis Presley looked into a crowd of 14,000 people and saw him, really saw him. Not the uniform or the medals or the missing arm, but him. Michael Patrick Donovan, the Marine, the man, the survivor. That is what the reunion in Las Vegas was really about. It was not about spectacle or entertainment or adding another story to the Elvis legend. It was about 2 men who met in hell and recognized each other later in the light. It was about a promise broken and then renewed. It was about the music industry's biggest star getting down on his knee in front of thousands of people and saying thank you to a man who had given everything. It was about acknowledging that celebrity and fame and fortune mean nothing if they do not translate into compassion and recognition and human connection. It was about using a platform to honor those who have no platform. It was about remembering that behind every uniform is a person, behind every medal is a story, behind every sacrifice is a human being who bled and hurt and struggled and deserves to be seen. And it was about 14,000 people who came to see a show and instead witnessed something far more important. They saw real courage displayed not just by the Marine who stood in that 3rd row, but by the performer who was brave enough to stop the show, to be vulnerable, to admit failure, to make things right. They saw real gratitude, real humanity stripped of all pretense, real tears from a man who was supposed to be too cool to cry. Because at the end of the day, that is what courage really is. It is not fearlessness, it is not perfection, it is not the absence of failure or doubt or regret. It is being scared and showing up anyway. It is recognizing when you have failed and choosing to do better. It is making promises and keeping them, even when it costs you something, even when it would be easier to forget, even when remembering hurts. It is seeing another person, really seeing them and saying with your words and your actions and your presence, you matter, your sacrifice matters, your pain matters, your survival matters. You are not forgotten, you are not alone. You are seen. Elvis Presley and Michael Donovan taught us that, one through song and performance and the careful use of fame as a force for good. One through service and sacrifice and the daily courage of choosing life over death, hope over despair, showing up over giving up. Both of them demonstrated that heroism comes in many forms, that it is not always loud or obvious, that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is keep going when everything inside you wants to stop, that sometimes courage looks like a man in a jumpsuit getting on his knee, that sometimes courage looks like a Marine standing up when he wants nothing more than to disappear, and that is a lesson worth learning, a story worth telling, a moment worth preserving and sharing and holding up as an example of what we can be at our best. Because somewhere right now, there is a young person in uniform wondering if their sacrifice will be remembered, wondering if anyone will care when they come home, wondering if they should keep going or if it would be easier to give up. And this story is for them. This story says, you will be remembered. You do matter. Someone will recognize you, even if it takes years, even if it seems impossible, even if you have given up hope. Keep going. Keep showing up. Keep fighting. Because your courage inspires others to be brave. Your survival gives others permission to hope. Your story matters. And somewhere else, right now, there is a person who made a promise they did not keep, who failed someone they should have remembered, who carries guilt for things left undone and words left unsaid. And this story is for them too. This story says, it is not too late. You can still make it right. You can still acknowledge your failure and do better. You can still use whatever platform or power or influence you have to honor those who deserve honor. You can still be the person you wish you had been. You can still keep the promise, even if you keep it late. Because redemption is always possible. Because growth requires acknowledging our failures. Because the most courageous thing any of us can do is admit we were wrong and then do the hard work of making it right. Elvis Presley did that in front of 14,000 witnesses on a stage in Las Vegas, in the middle of a show. He stopped everything, acknowledged his failure, honored a promise kept by another man, and demonstrated what it looks like when fame and power are used, not for self-aggrandizement, but for recognition of those who truly deserve it. And Michael Donovan did that too. He survived, he rebuilt, he chose life, he raised a daughter, he taught students, he kept his promise. He showed up. He demonstrated every single day that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. And 14,000 people witnessed it. They carried that story out into the world. They told their friends and families. They wrote about it in letters and journals. They remembered it decades later as one of the most powerful things they had ever seen. Not because it was entertaining, though it was that too, but because it was real, because it was human. Because it reminded them that beneath all the costumes and performances and celebrity myths, we are all just people trying to do our best with what we have, trying to honor our promises, trying to see each other, trying to matter, and we do matter, every single one of us, the famous and the unknown, the celebrated and the overlooked, the heroes who charge into ambushes and the heroes who rebuild their lives one day at a time, the performers who use their voices to honor others, and the teachers who shape young minds to create a better future. We all matter. We are all connected. We are all capable of courage. We are all worthy of recognition. We are all fighting our own battles, carrying our own scars, trying to keep our own promises. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, someone looks into a crowd and sees us, really sees us, and says, I remember you. You matter. Thank you. That is what happened in Las Vegas on August 7th, 1973. That is what Elvis Presley gave to Michael Donovan and, through him, to all of us. A reminder that we are seen, that we matter, that courage takes many forms, that promises can be kept even when they are broken first, that it is never too late to do the right thing. That is a gift beyond price, a lesson beyond measure, a story that needs to be told and retold until everyone knows it. until everyone understands what happened in that room, until everyone grasps the profound truth at its center. Show up anyway, keep your promises, see each other, honor the sacrifice, remember the fallen, celebrate the survivors, use whatever power you have to lift up those who have none. Be brave enough to admit your failures, be courageous enough to make them right. That is what courage looks like, that is what honor means. That is what it means to be fully human in a world that often tries to reduce us to labels and roles and expectations. Elvis Presley knew that in the end. Michael Donovan lived it every day, and 14,000 people witnessed the moment when those two truths collided on a stage in Las Vegas and created something beautiful, something true, something that still matters nearly 50 years later. If you found this story as moving as I did, please consider subscribing to this channel. Share this with a veteran in your life. Let them know they are seen, they are remembered, they matter. Visit your local VA hospital, donate to veteran organizations, volunteer your time, write letters, make phone calls, show up, and leave a comment below. Do you have a story of an unexpected moment that changed your life? A time when someone saw you when you thought you were invisible, a moment when you were recognized and it saved you? Share it with us. Because these stories, these moments of human connection, they are what make us who we are. They are what give life meaning. They are what we are really fighting for, not territory or ideology or political systems, but this: connection, recognition, love, the ability to see each other as human beings worthy of honor and respect and gratitude, the courage to keep showing up even when showing up is terrifying, the hope that our sacrifices matter and will be remembered. That is what Elvis and Michael gave us. That is what we must pass on to the next generation. That is the story we must keep telling. Because somewhere, right now, someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know that they are seen, that they matter, that their courage inspires others, that their sacrifice was not in vain. And maybe that someone is you. Maybe you are the one who needs to hear this today. Maybe you are the Marine standing in the crowd, wondering if anyone remembers. Or the performer on the stage, wondering if your work matters. Or the teacher in the classroom, wondering if you are making a difference. Or the parent raising a child, wondering if you are doing it right. Or the survivor of trauma, wondering if you will ever heal. This story is for you. This recognition is for you. This acknowledgement is for you. You are seen. You matter. Your courage inspires. Your survival teaches. Your presence makes the world better. Keep going. Keep showing up. Keep fighting. Keep hoping. Keep believing that it matters, because it does. It all matters. Every moment of courage, every act of kindness, every decision to keep going when giving up would be easier. It all matters. You all matter. Show up anyway. That is what courage looks like. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for being here. Now go be the person this story needs you to be. Go keep your promises. Go recognize those who deserve recognition. Go honor those who deserve honor. Go show up anyway. The world needs you. We all need each other. And together, showing up despite our fears, keeping promises despite our failures, seeing each other despite the barriers we build, together we can create more moments like the one that happened in Las Vegas. More moments of recognition, more moments of gratitude, more moments of profound human connection that remind us why we are here and what we are fighting for. That is the legacy of Elvis Presley and Michael Donovan. That is the story that must never be forgotten. That is the lesson that must be passed on. Show up anyway. Keep your promises. See each other. Honor the sacrifice. Remember, always remember.